All right. Welcome to Magic Without Fears, Hermetic Podcast. Dr. Angela Puca. How was Ireland?
Oh, Ireland was great. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. So I'm glad to be here. And yeah, I was recently in Ireland for two conferences, actually, the conference of the European Association for the Study of Religion and the conference of the European Society for the Study of Western Aestheticism. Usually we just shorten them with the acronyms EASR and SW, but I know that people outside of academia wouldn't know what that means. So I try to just say the whole thing so that people understand. But yeah, Ireland was good. I was mainly in Cork, and I also got the chance to go to Dublin because there were a few days in between the two conferences, and so I thought I might as well. And I saw some interesting and esoteric stuff in Dublin, so that was great.
You see the Yates exposition? Did you go to that
Yes.
one? Yeah, that's
Yeah. And I
classic.
also posted the pictures on my Instagram and my social media.
Oh, I must have missed those. I'll have to check them out.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I was really sad that that exhibit wasn't there in the years I lived in Ireland, but I really definitely got to get back to go in and obsess about it to the point that they think I'm gonna planning a robbery.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's great. You can see his diaries and yeah, it was amazing. I posted everything on my social media. So if you're interested, I think that you will really like the pictures and the videos that I posted.
Awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, I relied on one of the pictures from Yates's diaries recently as I was finishing up my Golden Dawn Phoenix wand. And originally I painted it like three layers of paint in gold for the
Mm.
head. And then I looked at his diary image. I'm like, wait, it's white. But we're so
Mm.
used to Israel Regardie and Aleister Crowley's interpretations of the Golden Dawn. Even some of us, like I was initiating the Golden Dawn in '96, even some of us, like me, still get it muddled in our head just because the new material that has made changes has retroactively been sort of superimposed on the old material to the extent that famously people do pentagrams in the LBRP in blue when originally they were done in white. These changes
Mm.
occur somewhere in the tradition by mistake or intention, and next thing you know they are the tradition.
Mm.
So getting original material is always fun for us practitioners, which is why people like you, of course, are so valuable. And you're
Yeah, that's very nice of you. And you mentioned that you were initiated in the Golden Dawn, and probably your listeners and your viewers already know your background, but I'm now curious to know something about your background if you feel comfortable sharing.
yeah. um I was initiating the Golden Dawn Temple Tahuti, which was here in Vancouver and run by a really reputable adept. Because sometimes it's more important who the leaders of a small group are than who's in charge of the overall superstructure around the world, right? The big heads, what matters is the little heads. And so we had good people there, and that was a good experience for me. I was young. I was very young. I was 15 at the time. But I'd grown up in the Waldorf school and in a Maharishi transcendental meditation family. So I was pretty much raised in it, going to psychic classes and stuff when I was an early teenager. And so by 15, I felt I was ready for the real business. I also really needed something solid in my life that would carry me through the chaos of family stuff, so it that kind
Who
of,
who doesn't need that?
yeah, it was very life-saving in that regard, because after a messy divorce and remarriage with my dad, like, that sort of stuff can just go on
Yeah,
in
I'm
your life.
sorry about that.
And all of a sudden as a kid, that can be a very dangerous thing, to all of a sudden, have no one around it anymore at all and be on your own most of the time, and to have to realize that, like, those early teen years that you're on your own in life in general, that's a powerful trauma that I think requires powerful transformation to survive. And that's one thing that, despite perhaps some attempts to deny, magic still offers to people that sometimes they can't find in any other place. So,
Mm.
yeah, I'm really glad that
Yeah,
I
that's an
found it when I
interesting
did.
point.
And I'm glad I had a good group of people, because, things vary. In your doctoral thesis, you studied signatura. Did I say that right?
Segnature.
Yeah, I won't try and say it right, but
Well, it's fine. I mean, you can try, even if it's not perfect. You at least attempted to pronounce it right. Yeah, because for if you couldn't tell, I'm Italian. So,
yeah,
uh,
that's it's cool. There's not a lot of Italians. Italian's been a language I've tried to learn for some years because, as my friends say, I only like to learn ones that are useless, like, in seminary, biblical Hebrew and Aramaic.
Italian is not useless.
Thank you. That's what I told them. Now I have, now you have authorized me to slap them for mocking my attempts. But yeah, no, lots of people speak Italian, lots of Italians. It's
Yeah, I mean, if you want to live in Italy, if you want to learn poetry and literature, lots of other things. But yeah, I think that generally learning languages is extremely important because it's not just about gaining the tools to communicate in a different language. It's also a way of expanding your mind and your mental capabilities, because when you have to construct a thought in a different language, it's not just you're not just translating word by word, you are developing your thinking in a completely different way through different pathways, and that allows your mind to work maybe more, but also in a different way. And so you really expand your capabilities. And I think that for a practitioner, I would imagine that that would also be beneficial in terms of magical practice, because there are many exercises that have to do with increasing your mind skills, mental skills. So just saying. And in terms of learning languages that are not useful, tell me about it. I've studied Latin, ancient Greek, Sanskrit, and Tibetan. So then I decided to also learn languages that are actually spoken. For instance, English, which is perhaps the latest one that I've learned because of my PhD, because I did my PhD in England, and then I've stayed in England ever since.
You enjoy England?
um, yeah, I like it here. I think that I need to go back to Italy every so often. Otherwise, I really feel homesick. So I remember that during the pandemic, I really suffered because of that. So um, yeah, there are people here that think that I'm really proud of being Italian. It's like, oh, you're really proud of your culture, but I never really thought about it before moving here. So I think that it's the fact that I'm here that makes me more Italian in a way, because it's like when you are in a different place, it's made salient to you the fact that you are not from that place, and so you start thinking about it more as well, because you realize that you move in a different way, you gesticulate in a different way, you speak in a different way, and so you start realizing that you're different. So yeah, I wouldn't be as you know talkative and expressing so much my Italianness had I stayed in Italy. I'm sure.
Yeah, that is an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? The
Mm.
um, the thing I always say that the thing that made me most Canadian was moving to Ireland, um,
Do
because
you live in Ireland?
I did for a good while there after yeah, in 2005 and up until the recession. I was in and out because I was playing in a Celtic band, so I was had a place in the country in Galway, and I was living on Inishmore for a while because Irish language is one of my great loves and has been a constant study of mine since I was a child, along with like German and French and the usual Rudolf Steiner school languages that we have to learn. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying on language. Language and instruments and playing music, learning music has been probably the greatest challenges and greatest rewarding things in my life. I know you went to a sort of special school as well. Um, so we don't necessarily like it when they call it special school, but oh God
Yeah,
knows
it
my
depends
friends
what you
called
mean
it
by
that.
special school.
Yeah,
It depends what you mean by special school.
I would be my friends would call it that as a kid, and I'd be like, "You mean elite, or
Mhm.
not free for you poor bums?" It was expensive, but we got a good break because we were poor. So thank you to the Waldorf School for that. What was your school called, and what is the style of school? I know you talked about it with Foolish Fish a bunch, so we don't need to redo that, but it is interesting and how
So
common.
I wouldn't say that I went to a special school by the definition that you just gave,
I'm
because
sorry.
in Italy school is free, school is public, and in fact there is a I find it fascinating because here in the UK there's the perception that private school is better and public school is worse, and I think it's the same in the US. I'm not sure about Canada. Maybe it's kind of the same.
Mm.
In Italy, it's the opposite, and I know that in other countries in continental Europe, it's also the same thing. So because the idea is that when you go to private school and you pay, it's like you pay to pass. There's the perception that you need to pay to get your degree, whereas the public schools are either free or you have very low fees. And so it's really difficult to pass. So if you have a degree at a public school, it means that you really worked hard, because nobody cares if you pass or not. You're not paying for for your degree. That's the kind of perception, that you kind of pay for your degree when you go to a private school, whereas when you go to the public school, which is the most common, really, like up until you're 18, school is free in Italy. And then the public universities have a fee that depends on your income, and there are private universities as well, but they are quite rare. And as I said, usually with a couple of exceptions, they are considered to be sort of less valuable than the public university or public schools, because it means when you go to a public school, it means you really must have worked hard to get your degree. Otherwise, you won't get it, and lots of people don't get it.
Yeah.
Whereas in England, students, once they get in, it's difficult that they don't get their degrees.
Mm.
That's very different in Italy. When you go to a university in Italy, a lot of people don't end up getting a degree. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting. I've never thought about that before, but it's a good point. I mean, do you worry about the university world as much as some people seem to online? Just a little quick side note. I'm just curious, because there's so much being spoken of universities and the waste of education and all of that, and useless degrees. And there's some real concern amongst that. But at the same time, there's not really anywhere else you can go to learn any of the stuff that we learn at university. Like, where else are you going to become a master of romantic poetry? Right?
Yes.
And like, what's wrong with you wanting to do that? I mean, you might not.
Yeah. Well, as an academic, I obviously love the institution of the university, and I understand and acknowledge all the issues that are there when it comes both to the university and academia more generally. And the way the way universities work really depends on the country. So I'm more familiar with what's happening in the UK and in Italy, of course. So yeah, I do see increasing issues in the UK university system, but at the same time, I wouldn't be, the person to say, oh, people shouldn't go to university. Absolutely not. I just think that we need to be critical and be aware of what the issues are so that we can work and improve the system, but not just dispose of the system altogether just because there are certain things that need changing, perhaps. And then it also depends on what is your view and your idea as to how education should look like. But yeah, I am critical of the higher educational system, but at the same time, I'm also fond of it. So yeah, I would encourage people to go to university, absolutely. And then if there are issues, those need to be reported and highlighted, and perhaps hopefully they will be worked on so that the system improves.
Yeah, and I think you're very much one of the people also pioneering, as an example for others, what you can do independently with education, right? You don't have to actually be a lecturer and working PhD in a university system to put your knowledge and learning to use in the world, or to turn it into a career or a side hustle, or just to share it for the sake of, loving it. Assuming if you study romantic poetry your whole life, probably really love it. So, what do you do with that after getting a degree in it? Well, there's opportunities more and more with the internet economy, for better or worse. And so I think
Yeah.
it's very cool how you're.
I yeah, I personally like the idea to also work at the university in different capacities. Now I think that I'm moving more towards doing research, more research work as opposed to teaching work at universities, just because just because I think the teaching can be very time consuming, and I feel like I'm fulfilling my desire of teaching through my YouTube and my online presence. But I also really like working with other scholars and other academics, and being part of the community, being part of those circles. So I think that um, this is kind of a debate that I've had with myself. I mean, would you just go online and kind of leave the university and being affiliated with the university? And every time that I ask myself that question, the answer is always no. I mean, it's no, I don't want to just be online. I also want to be affiliated with the university. And I totally respect people that feel differently, and they feel like, once they've done their PhD, they just want to go their own way and do online teaching. That's totally fine. For me, the reasoning is that I think that to be an academic, you need to work with the university and with other scholars, because being an academic means being part of a community and being part of a body of research, and being part of a network of minds and people that have different methodologies and different ideas and are advancing the methods and the type of knowledge and the amount of knowledge that we have at our disposal. So I feel that if I were to completely abandon academia and working at the university, I would lose the sense and the perception of what academia is doing and what other scholars are up to, and I would perhaps lose also I wouldn't be as updated with the latest methodology, the latest research. I think it's a very specific environment. The academic circles tend to be very the things that you learn within academic circles are things that you can not really learn outside of them. So that's why my idea is more to bridge the gap between the ivory tower academia and the public, lay people, or the community of practitioners. But in order to be a bridge, you need to be both ways, in both places. Otherwise, it's not a bridge, is it? So that's sort of my internal dialogue that I'm sharing with you. But I'm not saying that it is, the absolute truth or anything of the sort. But this is my rationale.
Yeah, no, I love it, and you're bringing up the bridge metaphor, and of course, as we talked a bit before I started on my experience with the first Association for the Studies of Esotericism conference in East Lansing in '04 with Nicholas and them. It was actually, it took me a cost. It was very hard to get there. I had to borrow money, fly to Toronto, take a overnight bus into through Detroit, stay at a cafe all night till the university opened, walk into the university
Wow.
exhausted, hoping I would
Was
find
it
someone.
in 2004, you said?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I still got the pamphlets and all that. And people started rolling in, and I met up with my friend from the Harvard Divinity School, Siobhan Cusack, the Reverend Siobhan Cusack, and we started to connect with all the people I've been connecting with, and that was exciting. And next thing you know, I got invited to lunch with these people who had been in there, and I was like, "Oh, you want me to come?" And they're like, "Yeah, well, why not? Are you hungry?" I'm like, "For sure am." And it was Jocelyn Godwin and I don't know, I always get confused if it was Claire Fang or Alison Couder. I love them both, but I can't remember because I didn't really know them at the time. But next thing you know, I'm having lunch with these people and just listening, and it was just such an inspiring and exciting experience for me in my life that I had to then immediately, of course, graduate and join a Celtic band rather than pursue it more. I don't know. I just needed a different experience for a little while, and it sort of took over. You know what I mean? But the rise of the esoteric movement in these associations has been just very exciting. Do you think it's interesting that that the rejected knowledge of esotericism and esoteric studies in the university sphere, since it's sort of marginalized? There's professorships being floating around out there for every esoteric subject. Is it interesting to you that as it's been rejected there, it's sort of found a strong voice on the internet due to its being rejected probably in the university system? It seems to me like there's been an interesting sort of connection there between the esoteric being a kind of pioneering element in the online education world, due to its marginalization in the mainstream academia, like forcing it to find other outlets to its audience. And I've been thinking about that. I wanted to see what you thought.
Yeah, I think that maybe the internet, it tends to be generally helpful for niche communities, because if the interest in a specific subject is rare, you will not, it is unlikely that you will find somebody that has the same interest in your town or in your community or in a place that is geographically near to you. So the internet sort of dismantles the barrier, the geographical barrier. So you can find people that have your same interests from all over the world. And so you can create a community that is not geographically based, but it is interest based. So I think that generally speaking, the internet has allowed for communities and subcultures even to create a community and have their space and have the possibility to share knowledge and gather more knowledge more generally. I don't think that is just in esotericism. What happens perhaps that is more specific to esotericism, and this is something that I talked about with Bernd Christian Otto in an interview on my YouTube channel, Angela Symposium. We were talking about the history and development of magic and the perception of magic. And he was saying that in the past 50 years have been the first time in history where magic has been perceived as more positive than negative. And that is because because of the media representations, and well, because of a number of reasons, because of numerous reasons. I think that Wicca is one of the reasons, for instance, because Wicca was quite helpful in sort of portraying an image of witchcraft that was more positive, we could say, in quotation marks. I don't really like these ethical dichotomous terms, but you know what I mean. There wasn't the perception that witchcraft was all about killing babies and cursing people and damaging people that you don't like and killing peoples and all things of this sort. So the perception was that witchcraft was about connecting to nature, and that there was a strong ethical stance underneath the magical practices. And I think that even though now that is perceived by the community of practitioners as an oversimplification and perhaps not really mirroring what human ethics really is, especially for people that are outside of a certain Christian or Abrahamic morality or perception of morality. So now it has been challenged. It has been challenged for quite some time, that kind of Wiccan ethical stance. But even though it has been challenged by practitioners lately, it was quite useful, I think, in sort of breaking the ice and break through and sort of allow pop culture to be a bit more welcoming towards the idea that witchcraft could be something that is beneficial and benign and that allows you to reconnect with nature. And then there's also the element of witchcraft that has been, and this is also due to Wicca and how it was received in the US, for instance, that it was associated with the gay and feminist liberation movement. And so it was also associated with reclaiming the power of the feminine and a perception of the spirituality and of the spiritual world that went beyond a certain patriarchal male based understanding. So that was also conducive in that. And then you have pop culture that has started to come up with perceptions, with portrayals of magicians, mages, witches, and people practicing magic that were portrayed as very positive characters. You know, you have Harry Potter and Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Maybe the new Sabrina is not that, but well, you know, it's a bit borderline. But you have many portrayals of witches and magic practitioners that are positive, and you even have, like with Harry Potter, that the non-practitioners are the ones that are evil, like in with Harry Potter and his family. So it's sort of a, you know, the narrative is turned on its head. And yeah, I think that slowly and steadily, because of a number of reasons, and I personally think that Wicca was an important stepping stone, but it was not the only one. It was also a change in the culture more generally, and the zeitgeist, and the fact that I wouldn't say that we have become more secular, but we have become more pluralist, religiously speaking. And that even though Christianity is still very hegemonic as a religion, it doesn't have that hold on the culture at large as it used to have, because there's more inclusion of different perspectives. So there are many elements that partly are due to the change in the culture more generally, partly because of the development within the history of esotericism and the history of, for instance, paganism and magic practices. But it's a number of concurrent causes that led to magic to be perceived as not as scary, not as the devil work. Yeah, I think that it's an interesting change. And another thing that in a way helped that kind of perception is also social media and the aesthetics that have been associated with witchcraft and witches and the crystals, and you associate, you know, you see these beautiful things and beautiful women and beautiful books, and you have, I think that that's also a form of art, and that art and that perception of beauty that you start to see associated with witchcraft, you know, it conveys that sense of peace and connection to nature and connection to your self and your spirituality. And so you start associating witchcraft to all of those things and not to devil worship as it used to be, because in the, you know, up until before I don't know, I guess 1960s or the 1950s, the portrayals of witchcraft were almost exclusively very negative, you know, portraying something that was extremely dangerous and harmful towards other people.
Yeah.
And against the community values and community morals. So it was perceived as something disruptive, as something that was other, that was dangerous and harmful. And all these perceptions have lessened. Of course, you still have communities that have that perception of witchcraft, but it's not the general perception. The general perception has become more and more positive, more welcoming towards magic practice. It is still, I would say that it is still rejected knowledge because it doesn't quite fit with the dominant cultural framework, which is in line with natural science and a certain secular understanding and perception of the world. But it is perceived as less dangerous and harmful.
Yeah, that's such an interesting aspect to it, the role of aestheticism and style and fashion and how culture can shift things and even flip them on their heads. At a conference, at the Pantheacon conference, the last 20 before COVID, I made a crack as I was walking down the hallway with some other women, and just about all the glitz and glamour that was there with people just looking to buy crystals. And I wasn't being harsh or anything, but they were like, hey, these people are paying for all this. It's a 6,000 person conference at a, and a really great time chance. Like I got to present to hundreds of people of my actual audience who are fascinated as I am by, W.B. Yeats and the Celtic mysteries and all that. So all that's paid for by the people, the commercialization of it essentially, and the aesthetic that's been brought in to make it more acceptable, which isn't bad. I mean, in grade 8 during Macbeth, I wanted to be one of the witches. My teacher was like, no, witches are only women. And so she cast me as Hecate instead. So don't ask me to explain her logic there, but things have completely changed. Another thing that's changed, interestingly, as a practitioner, I've noticed in the early 90s when I was really getting into Wicca, and me and my two buddies started our little coven in high school so that we could, experience some of this stuff for ourselves. I was getting training in the reclaiming tradition by Pat Hogan here in Vancouver. This would have been like 93, 94. And the reclaiming tradition was really good for me at that time. But one thing I noticed was when they found out I was interested in the grimoire stuff and the Golden Dawn, they were very hesitant because they're like, oh, like, they're calling for you to, they require you to harm animals and wear lion skins and kill cats and use blood, that they saw that as a very bad thing. And I wasn't planning on killing any cats, of course. I figured that was either code or you just skipped over that part. I'm still not sure, but Jake Stratton, Kent, and other good people like that are helping me figure it out. And now, what I've seen is with the traditional witchcraft coming back and things just changing. Now it's ceremonial magicians and authors like Joseph Peterson saying, don't you dare kill an animal for a ritual. Don't you dare. But now it's witches who I hear of doing actual sacrifice. I don't know what you've heard of that kind of flip, but that's a flip that seems to me to be quite an interesting one, just worth noting.
What kind of witches would do sacrifices?
I didn't really want to ask too much, honestly, because I'm not an anthropologist like you, and also would be very concerned about offending or just, I've just I've just heard that that's made a sort of a comeback in the witch scene, whereas it's definitely on the outs in the ceremonial scene. So I found that sort of interesting to hear. I heard of someone on my friend, the Esoterianness podcast, I think so, was someone from the Coyote Church talking about sacrifices and rituals they were doing years ago to, that's sort of the part of the Gen Peorage group, right? And that I think loosely connected with that scene in LA. That I was around a lot in the 90s when I was going through the Golden Dawn initiations at a temple there. So, there's some radical stuff going on amongst practitioners, I'm sure.
Would it be not animal sacrifices that they have
I'm
reported?
sure. Yeah, I'm sure, though I don't know the details. But just the switch of that, I thought you might find sort of, to me, it was interesting that, in the 90s, like the Wiccans were like, definitely don't have animals. Now it's the witches being like, sometimes you have to, we're doing this for real. I'm worried that part of that is reaction to them wanting to separate themselves from the so-called flaky New Age Wicca that they're in rebellion against at times in traditional witchcraft. I also wonder about how much there really is evidence of traditional witchcraft, but I think you and Ronald Hutton probably have already covered that on your channel.
Yeah, well, when it comes to witches performing sacrifices, I'm not aware of that. Nothing of that sort emerged in my research so far. There are animal sacrifices being made in in certain traditions, even in Afro-Brazilian traditions and in some native traditions, you can find something of that sort, although in that case it's very contextualized, and it's more similar to well, it really depends, of course, on the kind of ritual, but in some cases you can see that the killing of the animal is also associated with feeding yourself with that meat. So there are cases where it's more like sacralizing the food that you're going to eat. In other cases, it can be an offering to a specific entity. So it really changes, and I think it's very difficult to generalize. You need to see the practice in the specific context, in the specific tradition, and with the people that do it and why they do it. But in terms of thinking about the magic practitioners in the Western world, yeah, I'm not aware of that. Nothing of the sort has emerged unless they practice one of those traditions. But yeah, if anything emerges in the future, I will let you know. But as for you were asking about traditional Wicca
Traditional witchcraft, yeah, versus
or
Wicca.
witchcraft.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean by traditional
Yeah,
witchcraft?
exactly. I don't even know if that's a can we should open
No,
right here.
that's not. Traditional witchcraft is not a terminology that means anything. It is too generic to mean anything. If by traditional witchcraft we mean the traditional magic practice, then of course there's no such thing, because
Yeah.
every single place in the world has had their own magic practice, have evolved over time. So you don't have one traditional witchcraft, you have several traditional witchcrafts. Yeah, but it also depends on the place, and I think they wanting to find the one true tradition or the pure tradition or these things are problematic, and they are very often based in a mythologized understanding of what witchcraft is, and even an oversimplification, because you want the one tradition when you don't have the one tradition, you have millions of traditions. So
Yeah, I remember that was one of the most interesting things to me to learn studying the early days of Christianity in grad school. It was to realize the plurality is so overwhelming, you don't understand. Like my teacher was saying, you don't realize in the first century, they had a ton of churches worshiping the hermaphroditic Jesus. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, they had this. Like, this was a thing. You have no idea how many different varieties of practices and religions and spiritualities there are. So it's very hard when you fall into perennial thinking, right? Dan Trell did a great epic 4 hours on that with the sledgehammer on their
yeah,
joint thing.
I've also talked about perennialism quite a lot on my channel and even with my patients. So yeah, I think it is one of the lens that practitioners tend to use and want to use is perennialism. That perception that everything comes back to one, that there is one truth underlying all the different traditions. Then there's the concept of the Prisca Theologia, which is, the first theology, the first religious practice. But these are all things that are more steeped into the myth than they are in reality and in history. Because in reality, I mean, in history, you have several traditions, and if you want to see one underlying truth and that all the gods are the same god, well, it's just confirmation bias that you apply and cherry picking when it comes to the characteristics of the gods, that you only pick the similarities, and you completely discard the differences and the cultural and contextual elements that are so important for academics. So academics are definitely not perennialists, but I'd say that the large majority of practitioners are perennialists. And that is fine. It's not a critique. I mean, it's just a different, what academics do is very different from what practitioners do. Practitioners are interested in their beliefs, in cultivating their beliefs, finding their own truth, and making it and turning it into magic practice or spiritual practice. What academics do is very different. It's getting accurate knowledge, and you don't get accurate knowledge if you discard details and if you pretend that the cultural and contextual elements are not there,
Yeah.
because it sounds really nice that Aphrodite and Venus are the same exact goddess. So because they are both related to love and beauty. And a scholar would say, would more, for instance, in an instance like Aphrodite and Venus, what a scholar would do, they would look at the history and how the two deities got to be associated. What is the specific time they got associated? What was lost when that syncretism occurred, and what was gained, and how it developed further, and how that syncretism changed forever both the perception of Aphrodite and the perception of Venus. And even when they try and associate deities that are quite similar and have actually been syncretized, because sometimes I also see entities being lumped together that have never been syncretized in history. But even in the cases where they have been syncretized, like in this case, you will still see that there is a certain temporal bracket where that occurs, and it occurs in a very specific way. And as I said, it really changes how those entities were perceived compared to before the Hellenization of the Roman gods. For instance, the Roman gods were seen more as forces of nature. It was the Hellenization that anthropomorphized, that made them resemble human beings, the Roman gods and goddesses. So are they the same entity? Well, if you're a practitioner, you will look at the entity and perhaps be in contact with the spirit. And then the spirit may tell you, yes, I'm both Venus and Aphrodite and Jesus and everything else. And in that case, it is part of your spiritual experience, and no one can tell anything about it because it is your experience, and it is valuable because it is the experience that you have. But if we look at the history of those entities, then we need to look at the evidence and the historical developments. So I'm not and this is something that perhaps anthropology has taught me. I always respect the personal experience of practitioners. So if you have an extremely meaningful spiritual experience where you have a spirit that is in communication with you, and they say that they are a number of entities and they are the essence of those entities. I don't know, I'm just making this up.
Yeah.
I would still see that if that experience is meaningful for the practitioner, it is a religious experience and it is their personal experience with the divine, but it has little to do with the history of those entities. So I would say that that experience is valid for the practitioner and for their religious experience. But if they go into the world and they say, well, actually, these entities are all the same because I was told this in this meditation or this visualization or whatever it was, then they run into inaccuracy when it comes to delivering knowledge that is not accurate. It would be, I say, more accurate to say this was my experience. If this experience can help anybody, I'm just offering it. But sometimes you may see practitioners that because they have had a certain experience, they just claim it to be the truth. And that's a very Abrahamic way of going about having spiritual experiences, if you ask me.
Yeah. It's yeah. There's a really interesting parallel going on, or not going on, but in the magical world, sort of liturgically, as it were, to this perennialism particularity issue, which, the whole perennialism thing, that's one of the reasons I'm really glad I went to university, because if I just stayed like a pleb teacher in the Golden Dawn system, you know, without actually going to grad school and all this. I don't think I ever would have really understood the issues with Prisca Theologia, Sophia Perennis, and just, you know, this kind of level of critical thinking and hermeneutics in general. It's just, it really does change your brain in many ways in university when you're learning to think better or differently. And it, of course, it actually did challenge a lot of my thoughts and beliefs as a practitioner. I mean, aside from just realizing that the Gospels weren't written by the four dudes, it's it's quite a reshaping. And so the interesting parallel is in ritual practice these days between, say, Thelema and the Golden Dawn traditions. There's a debate between people who feel that any ritual sort of based on another ritual is the same ritual in essence, right? Because it's all coming from the same source and we're all humans, and because any ritual that we do with the right intention will connect with the same source, and since all forces are one force, it's the same ritual. But those of us in the Golden Dawn side of things tend to, you know, look at it that if you make an adaptation of ritual, it's a new ritual. If you change something the way it's done, it's not that thing anymore, right? Just like, you know, if you modify the supreme ritual of the pentagram, as Crowley did, to become the greater ritual of the pentagram, you can't say, so this is where it becomes a practical day-to-day issue between practitioners, right? You can't say that one thing is the other. What the Crowley's greater ritual, the pentagram, is doing can't be what this other Golden Dawn supreme ritual, the pentagram, is doing, because they're two different things. And so it's an interesting reality to see that, I think, play out in a sort of microcosm within ritual practice and development within practitioners. And I think there's a lot to be gained from understanding the value of particularities, even in our emic world of practicing magic, because of the respect it gives to the form and structure, history, tradition, and creation of those things in the first place. I mean, why do we keep doing ritual at all? Why do we still have churches and faiths and liturgies? And why, you know, like, why do we actually need to? I think it was Philip who was talking about the fact that we actually still don't really even know what religion is. I forget what his channel's name. We should shout out his channel. Not that he needs any, not that he needs
Let's Talk Religion.
Let's Talk Religion. Yeah. And Philip is his name. Yeah. He's great. All you guys in this community are great. So thank you again for, all that. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be gained from maintaining these traditions. And you see this struggle in the Golden Dawn world between people following Regardie's books and those drawing from the original source material. You know, there's tension there, of course, because some people are using modified rituals that were accidentally modified, not intentionally, but accidentally, and therefore they're not as traditional. And some people, of course, then get to say, oh, it's not real. Which is always fun so always a fun accusation, right? And what you do isn't real.
Yeah, I think it's that's a difficult matter, because depends if you analyze it as an academic or as a practitioner. So if you analyze the matter as a practitioner, the way you see these kind of things will massively depend on your belief system and your worldview. So if for you the focus is the energetic working and the magical working and affecting a certain change, the specifics of the rituals and all those kind of ritualistic elements and even aspects of the traditions will matter less. Whereas if for you, the ritualistic elements are an integral part of your religious experience and of the magic practice, and you strongly believe that changing it will have a completely different effect, then for you, those kind of details will really matter. So I think that whether you lean more towards the traditional ceremonial kind of perception or the more eclectic energy-based, more fluid, I don't know how to describe it, perception, it really depends on the belief system. No, I wouldn't say that, because that's kind of undermining and I don't do that.
Good. I'll do that
But
for you. I'm just having fun.
yeah, I think that they are both valid in their own rights, because there are some practitioners that find benefit in focusing on those details and the traditional elements, and other practitioners that find value in doing it in a different way. And from a practitioner's point of view, I would say that all are valid if they create meaning in your life and they enhance your spiritual experience. As an academic, from an academic perspective, what matters is the history. Well, if you do history of religion, you will study it historically. So if you have to identify the lineage of the Golden Dawn, you will look at all the developments and evolutions in terms of the texts that have been written and things that have been passed down. And if you study these phenomenon from an anthropological point of view, then you will collect data from the people that belong to the Golden Dawn, and you will start and identify patterns of meaning that are created by the beliefs that people within that community hold, the beliefs that they hold, and the things that they talk about, and what are the things that the practices that they believe are more valuable. So you collect all this data and you realize what is the perception that, for instance, Golden Dawn practitioners have about the importance of traditional elements within their practice. So this would be the anthropological outlook, for instance, whereas the historical outlook may be based more on text and the history of the tradition. And sociological, if it was a sociological study, it would be more interested in the effect that the differences in practices and the development of those practices have affected the community more generally. So the impact on the society, in this case, a small community, will be the focus if it was a sociological study. So even when it comes to religious phenomena, it really depends. When you study them from an academic point of view, it really depends on the field that you are in, whether you are a historian of religion. For instance, Ronald Hutton is a historian of religion. Whether you are an anthropologist of religion like myself, or if you are a sociologist of religion. So you really also have different perspectives, even as an academic, to look at a specific phenomenon. But in terms of practitioners, as I say, from a practitioner's standpoint, I think that what matters to people is their experience. And I think that I can say that even as a scholar, because one of the things that you realize when it comes to magic practicing traditions and magic practitioners is that for them, what counts the most is their experience. And the theory comes after. So usually they tend to the experience and what feels meaningful and feels transformative and feels effective to the practitioner is the foundation. And then the theory comes after. The theory must be in line with their experience and not the other way around. That is something that I have found, for instance, studying magic practitioners. So I would say that perhaps for the ceremonial magicians, the experience of the ritual and done in a specific way, and the experience of a traditional way of doing things may be more meaningful, may provide them with a more meaningful, effective spiritual experience. But that doesn't mean that it has to be true also for the eclectic practitioners that have a different way of perceiving their spiritual practice. So I would say that from a practitioner's point of view, it is a relativist matter, because it strongly depends on the experience of the individual and the belief system that the specific practitioner holds, and also the worldview that the specific practitioner has.
Yeah, very interesting. I don't know if I hope also when I use the word woo woo, didn't mean that negatively. I don't know if you know, but Tommy Kelly, the Irish magician, has taken it back. So we've taken back woo woo. It's a positive thing now. We're running with it. Like, go woo woo. It's just like, let's own our own ambiguity. Yeah. It's
Yeah, I have one of my patrons, Hank, who also uses it in a positive way.
yeah,
So
yeah. Oh, I use it in a positive way, acknowledging the reality still that it represents. Again, like you said, both these things have benefits and flaws to them, and our approaches and all of that. And it is interesting how it all comes down to experience in so many ways. It maybe is one of the things that makes magic fundamentally different from religion, in fact, because if your experience contradicts your religion, well, things might not go so well for you, especially if you tell too many people what you're thinking.
mm,
Whereas in magic, we alter our tradition almost for experience. A goetic magician will change the names of the spirits, even if they're old famous spirits in their book of invocations. If the spirit tells them it's a different name, this is my name.
mm.
This is my real name. This is my real name. Cross it out, put in the real name. So that's a very interesting thing. Uh reality.
I have a video on my YouTube channel on the difference between lived religions and institutionalized religions. And as I explained in that video, I think that also happens with people that follow a specific religion, that there's a discrepancy between what people should do and what they actually do. But maybe it is a bit, to a lesser degree compared to magic practitioners.
Yeah, well, I mean, I used to be a Roman Catholic, so I sort of get it. Um, I mean that discrepancy, actually, that my inability to be congruent with the faith was what prevented me from staying Roman Catholic. It just, I couldn't be congruent with myself because I didn't actually believe all this stuff they believe,
Mm.
especially when it comes to social teachings, for example. That was just so, Anglicanism was a perfect fit after that.
Mm.
C.S. Lewis's advice was well in hand. Don't try and make a religion change to accommodate you. Just find one that suits you a bit better and go have a wonderful life. So God bless C.S. Lewis.
Mm.
I want to talk a little bit about Wouter Hanegraaff, if you don't mind, because
Mm.
he's been a major inspiration, like all of these fellows have been for me for many years. Um, and I'm very excited to read his new book that I hear you're doing a book study on in your Patreon, which everyone should go join. And yeah, I'm sorry I can't be a part of that book study, but I'll read it when I get around to it. He had an article in Religion magazine, and sorry, early morning, in Religion magazine, that really I found quite astounding, because he was sort of taking to task the entire field of religious studies. And essentially reading between the lines, it seemed to me, I actually covered that article on the podcast. It was a very exciting episode, because it seemed to me what he was saying is, it was like he was almost saying as close as he could without actually saying it, that maybe religious studies departments should be renamed spirituality studies. Because what he was saying was, like, if it seemed he was saying there may not be this as full a future in religious studies as there could be, if we opened up to the spiritual aspect and element in humans' lives, which religious studies sort of cuts through that a bit. Maybe it is opening up more and more now, but just seeing his article and his hope for maybe reimagining how we look at religion in a way that can actually include the spirituality of the person involved, because it's always a problem, even in academia. You see this with I do a lot of John Dee studies because I teach Enochian magic and do it regularly, and with John Dee studies, in a lot of writing, one of the problems is they're rejecting out of hand the possibility that the experiences he's having have any validity. And as soon as you do that, of course, you're not going to understand why we're doing what we're doing, right? If your assumption is that there are no spirits, and that if that's all make believe, or essentially mental illness, then how could you come to a correct conclusion about what the reason for doing all of this is, and why this would be done this way, and that sort of thing? So they miss a major component of John Dee when they ignore that, just like you miss a major component of him when you ignore his Christianity and the apocalypticism that goes hand in hand with his time. He was, I mean, he was doing that stuff at the end of a century, like we've just lived through. And of course, millenarianism comes into play almost every case like that, right? We always say the world's ending every 100 years, without exception, it seems.
Especially every 1,000 years.
Especially.
But yeah, as you, if you follow my social media, you will know that I have met Wouter, or I should say Professor Hanegraaff
Yeah, that was a great interview
at
with
this.
him. I really loved your interview with him.
Yeah, I thought it was great. He's a great speaker and a great writer. But we also had private conversations, so I know how he thinks about these kind of matters.
Yeah, well, that's
Um,
why I was excited to ask you, because after that religion article, he wrote that article a few years back, and then his new book is Hermetic Spirituality. And I was like, okay, he's doubling
yeah.
down.
So we also had private conversations about this matter of religion and spirituality, and I think that he strongly believes that at the moment. For him, in the conversations we've had, which is also mirrored in the interview on my YouTube channel, it was more moving from using the term philosophy to using the word spirituality, as opposed to moving from using the term religion to the term spirituality. So, because what he was arguing is that the many of the practices that we call philosophy, especially when it comes to Hermetic philosophy, they are actually Hermetic spirituality. They are not philosophical, but they have been called philosophical because they have been um, made to appear more rational and less spiritual so that they could be more acceptable. They have also been Christianized. So the Corpus Hermeticum that we have, the Hermetic texts that we have, the ones that have survived because they were more acceptable to the Christian, the Christian writers that allowed for them to survive, and some of those texts were lost, and many translations are either Christianized or. In fact, one of the things that I was talking about with Wouter is that he says that there's no good English translation of the Corpus Hermeticum, and he was because I was about to do a Magus lecture, because every month I do a lecture for my Magus and upper tiers level patrons, and I was planning to do a lecture on the Corpus Hermeticum and Hermetic texts and Hermetic spirituality with my patrons, because they were very fascinated by my interview with Professor Hanegraaff. And I contacted him because I was wondering whether there was a good English translation that he would recommend, because one of my patrons also asked for that. But he said that he doesn't think that there is a good English translation. And I was also seeing that there was a conversation going on that in a in a private social media space. But so yeah, the one that he recommends a German version and a French translation, but there's possibly going to be a good one in English in the coming years. But yeah, I think that the issue is that quite often through the past, since there has been, especially in the past, and now it is lessening, but there used to be a Christian hegemony even when it comes to culture, then in order for things to be acceptable enough to survive, they needed to either resemble Christianity or Christian, the Christian religion, the Christian mysticism in one way or another, or they needed to be rationalized and resemble philosophy, like, Greek philosophy, for instance. So these are one of the two things that have happened with Hermetic texts. So that's one of the reasons why he argues that it's now time to recognize and acknowledge the fact that it's not Hermetic philosophy, it's Hermetic spirituality. And I agree with him. And I think that, it's the time has come for this kind of acknowledgement, because if you read the Hermetic texts, they are not really that philosophical. They are very practice-based.
Yeah.
So I think that there are philosophical elements. So there are, I would say, philosophical elements for sure, but they are philosophical elements that are geared toward, the reason why those philosophical elements are there are because they want to be conducive to the spiritual practice of the reader or the person that is trying to employ the things that are written in those texts. So I agree with him that it's more spirituality than it is philosophy. And also there's the matter that calling it spirituality perhaps allows to broaden religious studies as a scholarly field in universities. But I think that this is also happening in religious studies more generally around the world. So the category of religion has been challenged by many religious studies scholars. So even those outside of esotericism, religious studies scholars have challenged the category of religion. They have
Okay.
highlighted the fact that religion is not just the so-called world religions, and it's not just religions that resemble a certain structure, mainly a monotheistic kind of structure. That religion is goes the category of religion should be more inclusive to the other religious forms that do not resemble that specific structure. So yeah, I think that that's also important to highlight. This is a conversation that has been going on in religious studies for quite some time now.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, of course, because I've not been in the academic world for a while. So yeah, thanks for letting me know that. It's so Wouter's not the first to, sorry, Dr. Hanegraaff is not the first to raise an issue with that. It's really interesting to imagine like
I
what it might be.
Professor Hanegraaff is the first to highlight the issue when it comes to Hermetic philosophy. And
Oh,
in his case, he was specifically talking about Hermetic philosophy being acknowledged as being Hermetic spirituality as opposed to Hermetic philosophy. So as far as I know, he was not really talking about the category of religion, but I just added that that is also going on among
yeah.
religious studies scholars because I thought that could also be of interest.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. It is. Do you see religious studies being called something else in the future if it were to change its name? I mean, the only reason I can think it would really change its name is to maybe encourage people to, fill the classes up on a fundamental level. I mean, like you don't change if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If an entire field is working, then there's no reason to change its name. But if a field's in trouble, maybe a slight name change and refocusing could include more people within its interest and purview. So and there's a lot of people who want to study more religion and spirituality in our world, and are glad that Christian hegemony has waned and that there's a freedom to really actually explore and talk about almost anything these days without fearing religious persecution, at least here in the West, right?
Yeah, although it's still more difficult to get funding to the research in things that are
that's
not.
that's another issue. Let's not talk about funding these
Yes.
days.
Yeah, that's another issue. But so I've never heard any conversation within academic circles when it comes to rebranding or renaming religious studies as a field, although perhaps including spirituality could possibly help. But the reason why I've never had this conversation going on is because the study of spirituality is already part of religious studies for religious studies scholars.
Yeah, of course.
And in fact, as a scholar myself, as an academic myself, sometimes I would really hope that more practitioners would use more the term religion. I shouldn't say that because I'm kind of waiting for it to happen because the the term religion is more of a, how can I put it? Religion is a social actor and it enters the public discourse more directly. Spirituality isn't. So sometimes I feel like it's a pity that, for instance, magic practitioners or esotericists refuse the term religion instead of reclaiming it. Because I think that it would benefit practitioners more, let's put it that way, if they, because otherwise you're just leaving the term religion to, you know, those religions, the so-called world religions, that now scholars in religious studies really don't like that category anymore, the category of world religions that includes, you know, yeah, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Sikhism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and some others, but it's a bit, it's not inclusive. And you know, the rationale for what counts as a world religion and what not, it's still, it tends to be, it's still problematic because it tends to resemble a certain structure, let's put it that way. So religious studies scholars are already talking about the fact that the term religion should be more inclusive. And so practices that practitioners would call spirituality, religious studies scholars would already argue that they are religious. But since the practitioners themselves are not calling them religion, they are in a way giving away that term and that category that is a powerful social actor to those other religions, and they are just you know, removing themselves from the conversation in a way. So that's my perception sometimes, that it would benefit
So
practitioners
you think
to
they're sort of shooting themselves in the leg a bit by just not
maybe a little bit.
by not participate? It's like if you don't show up, you don't get a vote, right?
Yeah, in a way, yes. And I understand why that happened. I think that there was a, you know, the practitioners, especially those who do not follow the Abrahamic religions, they just hate the structure and the hierarchy and the dogmatism of religion, and they associate the term religion to those traits. But is it really the case that religion can only be that, or is it also that spirituality and spiritual experiences are also religious experiences, and that perhaps religion doesn't have to be dogmatic necessarily, that there are religions that are dogmatic and hierarchical and structured in a certain way, and other religions that aren't, and that there is variety across the different religions. So, but obviously, especially when you study these things as an anthropologist, what matters is how people construct the meaning around these terms. And so what I see is that mostly, I think that there is more of a movement towards starting to use the term religion, but it is still at its infancy, I think. So people still tend to associate religion with traits that they don't want, that they don't feel belong to their practice, and so that's why they prefer the term spirituality or witchcraft or other terms specific to the kind of tradition that they follow.
Yeah, it's we might have lost some understanding of what religion means in this bifurcation of you know, I'm spiritual but not religious, or the bumper
Mm,
sticker, spiritual people inspire me, religious people frighten me. You know,
mm,
you see this on the West Coast especially, because you know it's all hippie land, and and all the draft dodgers came up to Vancouver on the West Coast, you know, as protest for the Vietnam War. And I was mainly taught in high school by American draft dodgers who became teachers. And this separation, I think, between the dogmatism of the religious upbringing they had with their parents in a much stricter, you know, the baby boomer generation, versus all of a sudden it was the, you know, it's the 90s, and you know, everyone, like, gurus were very big, you know, Osho and Maharishi, which is what my family followed. um just made spirituality into this crazy 90s boom that we call the new age, right? Again, another one of my favorite books is Dr. Hanegraaff's New Age Religion and Secular Culture, which honestly I think every magical practitioner should read, though maybe it would disenchant them too much, I don't know, or just give them a headache. um, what's your thoughts on, like, I think the practitioner world should be mobilized by all of you to generate money for scholarships and chairs in departments of esotericism. That's what I think should happen. I even gave
Oh,
a
I would hope that happened because at the moment it's really difficult to.
That's what I want to make happen. Actually, I did a presentation at the University of Canterbury to Dr. Angela Voss's grad students and PhDs in 2019 when I was doing my little European lecture tour and stuff about, ways to make this possible, because I was heading to the States after to do a bunch of stuff, and I'd meet a bunch of people, a lot of people who are, have the resources to decide to do something like that, and they can make it happen, right? And I was sort of curious what the groundwork and how that could play out, to do the logistics of that. For me, a dream would be to get a scholarship happening under, Nicholas's name or something like that, just because, my whole doctoral experience was so impacted by lack of finances, and his death eventually, that it was really tragic. At the same time, I feel very lucky to have had the experience that I've had. But I do think the practitioner world, which as it's starting to gain more benefits and understand and recognize more of the benefits of academic research, I hope there's this bridge that we can build of harmony and synchron. What's the word? I don't know the word, but get the money from the practitioners to form chairs and scholarships. I think that would be that's something anyway. Anyone involved in that mission has my full support and as much time as I can always give to it. And I hope academics increasingly realize that there is a lot of appreciation in the practical practitioner world for the work that's being done, and we could do some cool things in the future. Losing the Exeter program, or it was at Lampeter in Wales when I joined, but losing the Exeter program was, I think, a big loss, tremendous loss to the field. And of course, we still have Amsterdam and the program there, and of course the Sorbonne. Though I don't know what Febvre is up to these days.
Febvre
Has he
passed away. Yeah, he passed away last year.
Okay.
There was also,
God bless that man.
Both Hanegraaff and Pasi and Bogdan have written also something in the SW newsletter about that, and also on blogs and their social media. But yeah, he passed, but there are a couple of universities in Sweden that are also teaching esotericism. So there's next year the SW conference will be in Sweden, in fact. There are a few Swedish scholars that are amazing in the study of esotericism. And I have interviewed a few on my YouTube channel, like Dr. Henrik Bogdan, Dr. Manon
He's very cool.
White. Yeah. And there's also what's his name? It escapes me now. And there's one on Satanism that was more recent. For some reason, I can't remember his name now.
He's an American guy, isn't he?
No, he's Swedish as well.
Some of you Europeans speak English so well, we can't even tell the difference. Especially the Swedes. They've got that English down. Sorry, your English is outstanding. Who? Okay. Say his name again.
Per Faxneld.
Okay.
But you were complimenting my English. Go on.
Oh, you dropped your English is obviously good, even to not to mention getting through a doctoral program in English and all that. It's impressive. But you repeat, even assuming it's good, you drop words all the time. I'm like, damn. I wonder if that's a common word in Italian and therefore she's using it, or she just got that big a brain.
Well, yeah, I think it's because I read so many. Well, I read a lot, obviously, so I acquire more terms in my vocabulary because of that. And also, yeah, because I talk with a lot of academics and scholars, and so I think that's why my vocabulary is richer than And also maybe I think that I converse more, especially in English, I converse more with other academics and in a scholarly university conference kind of setting than in a more colloquial way, because since I started my PhD, basically academia took over my life. I'm hoping to get my life back and find a bit more balance in the future. But yeah, that I'm trying to say that my social time is usually when I go back to Italy with my Italian friends, and so I don't have much social time in English, and as a consequence, my language tends to be a bit more academic-y in a way, because that's
Oh
that's
yeah,
what I do.
yeah,
English is my work language in a way.
yeah, yeah. That's it's a oh man, languages are great. So much fun, so much fun. Um, I'm yeah, always trying to improve them a bit. So oh, we talked about Wouter and the spirituality thing versus the religion thing. Yeah. Well, do you think would it be okay if we said goodbye now and did a little snippet for my patrons, just a little bonus thing for
Yeah,
them? All
yeah,
right.
that's fine.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Angela of Angela's Symposium, Dr. Puca, sorry. You're wonderful. And it's an honor to have you on Magic Without Fears, the Hermetic podcast. Folks, thanks for listening. You can find me through the links below and more about Angela as well. If you've stuck to the end, bless you with wisdom and all of that.
Yeah, and thank you very much for inviting me. And if people are interested in following my work, they will find the links in the notes or in the info box, depending on where you're seeing this. But yeah, my project is called Angela Symposium, so you will find me under that name or Dr. Angela Puca.
And you have a book coming out, of course, through
Yes,
my favorite publisher. My buddy put out
Brill.
his book. My buddy Christopher Larrick put out his book through Brill. And one day I'll get it. It's been 20 years, but I'm saving up still. We're probably overblowing this, because occultists, if you haven't noticed, tend to spend maybe even $500-600 on a new book these days
Mm.
for those pretty editions, right? So maybe you academics need to start being like, my book's coming out from Brill. I know it won't cost as much as if it was, through Scarlet Imprint or Anathema Publishing, but please support my work and buy a copy, because compared to some occult books, Brill is actually not that crazy expensive.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if you know this, but we don't earn much from academic books at all. So,
Oh, I know that. I know that.
and
That's why I put my stuff out by myself on, you know.
yeah, well, I think that authors of books that are not published with an academic publisher, they earn much more in terms of royalties. But when it comes to academic publications, either you don't earn absolutely anything, or you earn very, very little, like peanuts, as they would say here in England. So it's kind of, I feel bad that my book is going to be expensive and it's not going to fund my work either. But it's
But it's
because that's the publisher in the field, and so in order to enter the conversation and being part of the academic circle, there are certain publishers that are considered more relevant. So yeah, it's more a decision that plays into my career more than my funds.
well, yeah, publishing, having your book put out by Brill is, you know, like going to a good university or any other great accomplishment. It's pretty hardcore. You're pretty
Mm.
hardcore. You went with the hardcore publisher. It's fucking Brill. So congratulations on that. That's awesome. Yeah, and of course you can always get these books through universities, and people know that. A lot of people realize these days that university libraries are accessible and you can always get them. So that's so
Yeah,
folks. And
even
what's
public libraries.
yeah. So
Sometimes
what's your what's the
you can get an interlibrary loan.
what's the title of your book?
I don't know
You
yet.
don't know yet. They haven't chosen it. Yeah.
No, well, yeah, I'm still working on because this is my PhD dissertation turned into a book. And I do have the title of my PhD, but I'm not sure if it's gonna work for the book. So I will be having a session with my patrons, because I very often talk with my patrons about this kind of stuff. And there's one of my patrons who's a librarian. So yeah, I want to get how to get a title that conveys what the book is about, because the title now is very academic, but I'm not sure how interesting and appealing it would be to the general public, and I'm hoping to reach out to the general public as well. So that's why I'm not sure I will be using the title of my PhD.
Yeah, yeah, you got to. My master's was called Hermeneutics and the Postmodern Epiclesis. When I put that out, I changed it to the Ethics of Understanding God, but with God crossed out because Derrida, erasure, all that. Dr.
Yeah.
Puca. So we'll do a little Patreon bonus segment now for all my wonderful patrons. Thank you for being here, and see you all soon.
Bye.